Good day, participatory design attendees and everyone watching. My name is Jaydon Farao, and together with my colleague Sarina, we will be presenting our paper titled Community-Based Co-Design Across Geographical Locations and Cultures, Methodological Lessons from Co-Design Workshops in South Africa. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, as well as the unceded and ancestral land of the 4 regions where this research took place. We'd like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the communities and people back home in South Africa, especially the communities we were privileged enough to work with across the 4 provinces, KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, Limpopo, and the Western Cape, in the diverse languages isiZulu, Setswana, Sepedi, Afrikaans, and isiXhosa, and multiple cultures for their generosity and humanity. We are immensely grateful. Our collaborator and co-author, Nonkululeko Khuzwayo, will now add a short acknowledgement in isiZulu.
Sithanda ukuthatha leli thuba ukuhlonipha abantu abadala esinabo manje nabadlule nabasazoba khona. Sihloniphe ukuxhumana nomhlaba, amanzi namasiko. Siyabonga ukusimema emphakathini nasendaweni yenu.
Collaborative design or co-design is the working together of designers and people not trained in design to creatively generate ideas and innovate solutions to challenges. Co-design has also become attractive because of its potential in mitigating ethical and design conflicts that arise when working in diverse, under-resourced, and often exploited settings. While the objectives of co-design are ideal, conducting co-design in communities or community-based co-design presents some challenges. As visitors to these communities, we often bring unfamiliar techniques and materials, expecting active engagement from community members. This can introduce methodological tensions. In many instances, the use of foreign materials during design activities, a common technique to elicit creativity, can contribute to power differentials by alienating participants and limiting engagement. Since co-design has become increasingly utilized in the global south, especially on the African continent, there is a need for understanding how it can better accommodate communities as a means to address their challenges while also being respectful towards their cultural and social realities. Power, space, and time form key properties of how we communicate in groups, and the influence of culture on these relationships are important to acknowledge. In co-design, specifically, these elements arise as the collaborative work often occurs in community spaces over a period of time and is conducted by a researcher or facilitator whom the community respects. These characteristics differ naturally across contexts, and thus the application of methods across contexts has introduced the challenge of cross-contextual transferability. This is where our paper fits in. We report on methodological challenges, diverse cultural nuances to consider, and lessons learned while conducting co-design workshops across geographical locations and cultures. The context for these workshops were 4 South African provinces, namely the provinces of KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, Limpopo, and the Western Cape. I now hand over to Sarina, who will take you through the methods.
The work reported in our paper forms part of a larger project initiated by a multidisciplinary and transnational team of researchers focused on how diverse digital technologies can support maternal and child health through co-design. The project consisted of 3 phases, with the dominant method of the 3rd phase being community-based co-design, accompanied by observations and informal conversations. Collaborators included a diverse group of mothers, fathers, community health workers, and other caregivers. The workshops were conducted in communities of 4 South African provinces. In KwaZulu-Natal, the rural community of Sweetwater welcomed us as our first research collaborator. Thereafter, we visited a group from Soweto and Gauteng, an urban region, before being invited to join a group from the communities of Garigale, Gamambolo, and Mothiba in rural Limpopo. Lastly, in the Western Cape, we visited the community of Athlone, a suburb of Cape Town. The one-day workshops were facilitated by local intermediaries and conducted in the local language as preferred by the community. During the previous phases of this project, challenge and design cards were developed based on community interviews and literature. These black and white pictorials depict men and women representative of the communities used in the study, aligned with existing literature. In the slide shown on the left, the challenge card depicts a mother visibly overwhelmed with a crying baby and older children. She is thinking about the numerous things she needs to do, such as waking up at the right time, cleaning, cooking, and traveling to and from work. The card represented the challenge, parental well-being. The card on the right show an example of people in the community, in this case community leaders, and another showing an existing technology which supports mothers across the South African public health sector, MumConnect. These graphics were used to enable cost-saving replication and transferability across regions and cultures, as the text on the cards were translated into the languages of each community. The co-design workshop sessions began with the community members prioritizing local maternal and child health challenges, using the challenge card as a guide and discussing amongst each other the issues the community currently deals with and generating a shared understanding. Thereafter, a brainstorming session was conducted with each group, using the design cards to formulate ideas to address the chosen challenges. The sessions worked towards low-fidelity prototyping, using craft materials provided in order to create a representation of at least one solution, ending with groups presenting their potential solutions while providing feedback as well.
I'll now move on to the findings. Hlonipha is a cultural politeness phenomenon present in both language and cultural practices, existing in South Africa and other African nations. It is a significant determinant of gender norms and affects women and men differently, and is usually characterized by an avoidance of speech in certain situations. For example, how and when women feel comfortable to speak in the presence of men, as well as the formation of separate dialects between men and women. During our workshops, the observation of Hlonipha manifested mostly in rural areas. In KwaZulu-Natal, women were reluctant to discuss the postpartum care challenge card in the presence of the sole male community member. This after being reassured by the facilitator that they could discuss any topic freely and openly. When discussing the same card in Limpopo, some of the men preferred not to contribute. During that Limpopo workshop, the male community leaders were also seen to drive the momentum of the workshop, taking the lead during discussions and activities, which consequently led to decreased engagement from the women, despite them being in the majority. The workshops reaffirmed existing rural-urban differences, with Limpopo and KwaZulu-Natal having male community members involved in the workshops, while at the Western Cape and Gauteng workshops, none were present. As a result, women felt more comfortable to discuss bodily issues, absent fathers, and religion at the urban-based workshops. At the rural sites, discussions on these topics were reserved. Turn-taking featured prominently at rural sites, keenly observed and facilitated by the facilitators to ensure everyone had an opportunity to speak. Granting everyone a turn to speak was also emphasized at these sites, whereas at the urban sites, only those who wanted to contribute did so. In addition to cultural norms and differences influencing the methodology, some of our research tools and artifacts introduced some unexpected complexity. The challenge cards also revealed mixed interpretations related to the community context. Only one of the challenge cards, for example, had COVID-19 related content on it. However, community members in Limpopo linked all cards to the COVID-19 context. It was later found that community discussions and community meetings on COVID-19 and vaccinations were commonplace, and thus at the forefront of everyone's minds. Similarly, despite a challenge card describing absenteeism of fathers, the lack of paternal representation in other cards raised questions from members, which indicated some researcher bias in their design and a lack of awareness on our part. The latter end of our workshops exposed some of the challenges in the prototyping and brainstorming activities. The use of design and challenge cards supported discussion and facilitation of ideation and creativity. But while this was successful, we observed unintended consequences in the process. The design cards, which depicted technologies such as chatbots, community wireless networks, and internet in a box, were at first foreign concepts to the community, resulting in reluctance to use these in their ideas. Instead, some groups preferred familiar concepts, such as mobile data and Wi-Fi, to ideate and prototype. When the foreign concepts were explained, paired with locally relevant examples, as was the case at our final workshops in the Western Cape, the response to these concepts were more welcoming and elicited greater engagement. We also tried to provide ample materials so that community members could adequately represent their artifacts. This, unfortunately, overwhelmed some participants. The findings described here and in the full paper had implications, which we discuss next.
While we followed a co-design approach aimed at making design more inclusive and having communities as equal partners, it is important to acknowledge that cultural and genderal norms affect the groups we work in. It is clear that involving men in groups to discuss and ideate on maternal and child health challenges and potential solutions is important. However, with the observance of Hlonipa, including men and women in the same workshop could negatively influence free, active, and enthusiastic engagement from women. To address this, in some cases, it might mean having separate activities that are gender-specific to encourage a more comfortable sharing of ideas and collaboration. Similar issues of seniority and hierarchy present existing power differentials in the community that affect engagement. In Limpopo, it was clear, with the presence of a member of the royal family who graciously invited us into the community, his presence, while extremely important to us and the community, did influence how openly participants felt to share their insights and opinions on the community challenges. It should be clear that Hlonipa is not necessarily practiced in an oppressive manner. This experience highlighted the importance of intermediaries and facilitators as collaborators. And while the effects of Hlonipa proved challenging for us as a researcher, its presence should be seen as an opportunity to consider more effective and culturally considerate co-design activities. The challenge cards were initially designed with the intention to provide a common understanding of the challenges the community faced, but the workshops produced diverse and unexpected interpretation of the challenges across the regions. Since COVID-19 was at the forefront of the community in Limpopo's minds, they interpreted all the challenges in relation to that. The workshops also took place during the pandemic. The members had already been inundated and overwhelmed with a plethora of health information. This can affect the manner in which ideas and activities are interpreted. It is thus important to understand what the community is experiencing temporally and spatially, so that co-design methods can take these realities into account. Language, of course, is a major factor in interpreting, but even more so in local dialects and ways of communicating. How questions were posed to the community members and how rapport was established was vital in our case. This meant intermediaries could understand and communicate linguistic nuances. Not doing so, one runs the risk of miscommunication and alienation. While design cards are used in human-computer interaction research as beneficial for ideation and concept development, the cards were used by all but one community to prototype immediately without ideation. This does indicate the ease of use of these cards, but also limited in-depth examination of some ideas. It also removes a key part of ideation, which is to simply produce as many ideas as possible. The role of the design cards and how they are used needs to be thought through in order to maximize prototyping activities and encourage deeper development of particular ideas. The idea of unknown concepts need to be strategically and thoroughly introduced to members as to avoid alienation, as well as to introduce new ideas in a manner that involves and excites the communities. This can be done through tangible examples and analogies familiar to the community, as well as consultation with intermediaries beforehand to better describe foreign concepts. We end with 6 key takeaways of our work, with the hope that future co-design across geographic regions and cultures can embrace communities and the realities while also achieving their goals. Including members of the community in the planning of co-design workshops to account for any cultural norms was vital, with the leadership of intermediaries in all of our regional workshops. The presence of translators is not sufficient to run workshops and can in fact lead to alienation. Having an intermediary who understands the local language and dialect, who can communicate effectively with the consideration of the cultural nuances, is important. Gender sensitization and acknowledgement of any power differential should be understood and considered when formalizing co-design activities.
Design cards can be successfully used to enable prototyping as an alternative to crafts and art supplies, and they can be used to explain complex and foreign technologies. But this needs to be done with a mind on context, cultural realities, and the time and space communities find themselves in. We'd like to end by thanking all our funders and academic institutions that supported our work and our presence here. Once again, we are indebted to the communities back home for the existence of this work. Thank you for your attention, and we will be available for questions after this presentation.